Welcome to Martial Wisdom. Here you can listen to conversations on all kinds of topics related to martial arts. I'm excited to have Tengu from the Tengu Martial Arts YouTube channel on today's show. We will be discussing a variety of topics around the core of Aikido and its potential future. We will be covering specific topics suggested from members of the Aikido the Martial Side forum. To all of you who have either contributed to the PayPal tip jar to support this show or who have subscribed to the Spirit Aikido online program, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. I hope you enjoy this episode. Now, on with the discussion. Welcome back, everybody, to Modern Aikidoist podcast and Martial Wisdom. I'm very excited tonight to have Tengu on from his YouTube channel, which is Tengu Martial Arts. I would encourage you to go on YouTube and look up his channel if you have not already. He's just got some great stuff that I've come across fairly recently, and reached out to him, and a number of the people on our Aikido the Martial Side forum on Facebook said, hey, you got to have a chat with this guy. I think we'd really like to hear what you two discuss. So welcome, Tengu, to the channel, and I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Hi, it's a great pleasure, great honor as always. I'm happy to be a part of this seemingly growing community and perhaps movement, and whatever contributions I can make. So really, really big pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. As for topic, really, I put out sort of an invitation to some of the forum members that knew that we were going to be having a chat, and got ideas from them for what they would like to hear us discuss. And so we're going to touch on a number of those suggestions within our chat tonight. Hopefully we'll fit it in our normal episode length, but if not, we're going to keep having more conversations. So to let you know, Tengu and I chatted just a few nights ago and had a great chat that could have gone probably 6-8 hours. And we just really got into it, and we're really having a great discussion. So we're gonna have that here. We just sort of covered a few of the topics, and the one I want to lead off with was something that he brought up, which is the different realms of Aikido training and how they are viewed, how we do them, and how they're often viewed, and even leading into that being almost kind of part of the problem that Aikido's having in terms of self-identity and the identity crisis it's having. So why don't you cover kind of your three realms of Aikido as you see them?
Sure. So typically, Aikido, at least traditionally, is seen as a collage of different aspects, right? So there's the self-defense portion of it, there's the weapons portion of it, and I would even say that traditionally that's actually where it ends. But for people who, well, honestly, just pay attention, it's very clear that there's a demonstration side of things now. And I did have a recent video that kind of went into that, and I won't reiterate everything there that I said, but the takeaway was that there's a strong incentive structure, and there really has been pretty much since the early days of Aikido, to be good at demonstration. And when people look at, man, how did we go from perhaps a more martially minded origin to this aesthetics-based stuff now? How did we get there? And I think it's pretty simple. It's that we've been incentivized to do this. People move through the ranks and are recognized through the beauty of their demonstrations, which I have no problem with necessarily. But those are kind of the three components of Aikido as it currently exists. To reiterate, because I know I just kind of vomited word soup.
Sure.
There's the aesthetics, there's demonstration Aikido, there's weapons work, and there is self-defense. Those are kind of the 3 points. I perhaps it's heresy, but am slowly beginning to advocate for a fourth in the form of sport. And I guess if we include Tamiki Aikido in this discussion, that exists too. But
and we will be discussing the Tamiki thing, because that was
yeah,
one of the suggested
it'll come
topics
up.
that we
So
covered. We'll be covering that again. And I
yeah,
did want to throw in something with demo. And I think with demonstration Aikido, I believe with contemporary Aikido in the last probably 30 years or 40 years, the demonstration aspect is the primary
agreed.
reputation that Aikido has. And I would go so far as to say that it's also led to Aikido's best success, because that style of Aikido, doing a powerful demonstration, that's what got into the movies. That is what made the huge marketing splash for Aikido being so visually compelling and just amazing to watch.
Well, even if you look at my channel, I use a lot of like archival footage,
Hmm.
old footage, and that really breaks down overwhelmingly into two different kind of categories. And one is like seminar footage that no one that someone filmed in 1982 that no one really intended to see, but to our great benefit they decided to post online for whatever reason.
Hmm.
And the other is demonstration. There's an overwhelming backlog of Aikido demonstration. So I would agree. Um, it's and for a long time it's been a successful marketing strategy. I wouldn't even say just for a long time. Since the beginning,
Hmm.
really, it's been a successful marketing strategy. Um, the weaknesses of the aesthetics Aikido are kind of self-evident though, in that training to be visible is not training to be functional. There might be some crossover. Uh, Indeed, sometimes when I train that way, it has kind of put me in a mindset to, let me put it this way: the people that are trained aesthetically sometimes put themselves in strange positions, and sometimes it's worth exploring those positions martially. Uh, but that being said, the aesthetics unto itself is not an end. Um, So the aesthetics is fine, and I try to say this a lot on my channel, and I'll reiterate it here. I don't see these realms as in competition with one another, and
Hmm.
that is something that I do want to reiterate over and over again. The problem with it is, a, from the un uneducated, I suppose, uninitiated is perhaps a better word, uninitiated person who's looking to get into a martial art. If they say, I want to learn a martial art, they tend to focus on that martial component, and which is fine. I'm not going to tell people how to spend their resources. But then they come to an Aikido dojo, and it feels almost deceptive in a way, because when they are doing the aesthetic based training, and some people, I think, they are training the aesthetics, and they haven't even reconciled with themselves, like the teachers haven't reconciled with themselves, that that is in fact what they are doing, and they mark it as uh this martial art, and people that come into the dojos feel they aren't selling what's on the tin. So I think that's first and foremost. I'm not saying that the aesthetics Aikido has to go away. I'm not.
Hmm.
Nor am I saying that we need to cut out weapons work, or that we need to cut out self defense, or we need to ignore sport or something of that nature. I'm just saying, if you are going to train a specific way, you better be damn sure that's actually what you're giving people. Um, that's the first thing. The second thing is that you can teach all of these things, and again, they don't have to be in competition even within your own dojo. Um, I've gone on record as saying that in my hypothetical dojo of the future, I probably would teach an aesthetics based class, and a sport based class, and a self defense based class. Um, and the reason I say that we probably should be doing that, I would recommend everybody offer at least two of those expressions. And the reason why is simple. Uh, it spoils people for options. The reality is that there will be people that come in, and I want to use this because I'm a cop or I'm a bouncer. I'm worried that someone is out to get me, or I just don't feel safe getting into my car at night or something. There's going to be those people. There's going to be people that want to compete in some form or fashion, and there's going to be people that are like, I just kind of want to move around. I don't want to worry about traumatic injury, and the aesthetic stuff is fine. I think by giving people those options, you are going to reach an audience. And I don't want to segue too harshly here, but the reality is, the numbers are very clear. Aikido is, especially in the West, is going through essentially demographic collapse. Um, I'm 29 going on 30, and I might as well be fresh out of the womb by Aikido demographics. I've barely tasted life, according to I'm not even really a real person, according to the common Aikido demographics. And there's nothing wrong with older folks being in the art. I don't want to say we got to push out this group. I'm not saying that at all. It's just that the future of any field is in the young people, and that isn't with martial arts. That's with sciences and STEM fields and construction. You can't sustain anything if there's a 3-to-1 ratio of like 20-year-olds to 60-something-year-olds, right? So we got to speak to those that demographic in particular. We're doing a great job with the older folks,
Mhm.
actually, but the younger folks we are and we have been dropping the ball on
Yep.
quite a bit.
One thing too that occurs to me regarding the demonstration Aikido, and I felt this as a teacher of having to do demonstrations to try to show people that aren't really sure what they're looking at, to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that they see what I want them to see so that they
Mm-hmm.
can try to emulate it.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt the pull as an instructor, the difference in when I was a student and I was trying to make my Aikido practical. There's a feel, almost a spirit to how you train. You
Mm-hmm.
want to have your movements big enough to be effective, but small enough to be sneaky and not seen. You want
Mm-hmm.
to you're honing that. What I
Mm-hmm.
found when I switched into teaching was that I needed to make my movements big, clear, easy for new people to see, because they miss a lot. I missed a lot when I first started. I didn't even know what I was looking at. And
Right.
and so I do feel that there is a tremendous pull for anybody who hosts classes, teaches classes, to hone their ability to demonstrate in such a
For
way
sure.
so that they can have what they're showing be seen.
Well, this won't be the last time I make this comparison, but I think it's a powerful one because of how prevalent BJJ is now, in kind of especially the American zeitgeist, but the Western world more generally. Aikido learning it is, in many ways, I feel it parodies BJJ in complexity. We'll put
Mhm.
it that way. There is a lot to it, and that's not to say there's not a lot to like judo or wrestling or things like
Mhm.
that. But I feel that Aikido is easier to fail at from a martial perspective by 1,000 little mistakes. Um, and same thing with BJJ for what it's worth. You know,
Mhm.
it can be very subtle. There's that whole invisible jujitsu thing. Whereas with judo, it's not that there isn't a very high technical ceiling. There is. However, if you happen to be a super freak mutant athlete, you need a lot less of that um to make it functional for you. Now, don't get me wrong, your success will directly correlate with technical ability, but early on you can see quite a bit of success if you're a 220-pound really fit young guy who's like, all right, I just need to get into this grip position, throw my leg behind the person, then you're going to be able to muscle most people to the ground, even people that have maybe been in the art substantially longer than they have. Whereas with Aikido, there's about 18 chances to fatally screw something up between gripping and execution. And therefore, being a good demonstrator is very important to a certain degree. And I think I've had this discussion before with someone, and if that person is watching, I apologize. I would call out your handle or whatever. But he was saying that, one of his point was that one of the reasons that demonstration is perhaps so big and flowy is so it can be seen by people who don't know what it is they're looking at. And I think as a theory for as to how it began, that makes a whole lot of sense. But somewhere along the way, it became an end unto itself, and that's the turn that concerns me a little bit. Again, it can exist. I'm not saying destroy the aesthetics based Aikido. I'm just saying be honest about what it is. If you want to offer that, that's great. And if it helps you teach those other expressions that we talked about, I'm not saying you got to shove each of those in a box and they can never cross over. No, it's still a holistic art. Um, if being a good demonstrator helps you teach students, power
I,
to you.
yeah, I agree. And I came across this jewel of wisdom years ago, and this is from my previous competition experience, and that is that small circles beat big circles,
Mhm.
and that is just a testament to efficiency.
Yeah.
But small circles are hard to see. They're hard to use
Yes.
for teaching. And so this is, I think, the the track that practitioners get in when they think, okay, I have to have my motions big, like I just saw in that demonstration, so I'm going to do them big. And they never get to the point where they start shrinking those movement circles and becoming more tight, more efficient, and honing, making that art theirs rather than just being a very good Xerox copy of what they just saw.
Exactly. There's this old series of books, which I know Aikido podcast, but I would still recommend everybody get a hold of it if you can. It's out of print. I think it was published by Ippon Books, and it's basically it's a series of books that goes into one singular technique, typically from the Aikido curriculum, and it's written by an ex-Olympic person every single time. So I think like Neil Adams, who's one of the current commentators of judo, did Tayatoshi, for example, which was his specialty technique. That's besides the point. First of all, actually, though, it is very cool that a whole book is devoted to one technique from a specialist. That's a format I would love to recreate somehow, some way, sometime. But I digress. What I was getting at there is that something that they frequently say across authors is that big movements in randori, in live practice, just don't typically work. But if you look at the demonstration, even in judo, we got leg swings that are very exaggerated, these big kind of step 1, step 2 type things. And in judo, they're very clear about, we're showing you this because it's the shape. But to be proficient at it in a live environment, you have to cut out the fat. Aikido doesn't cut out the fat. We kind of revel in the fat. It's like the fat is in many ways what's become the identity.
In
And
cooking,
it's,
don't they say the fat is where the flavor is?
well, and for years that's rung true, but
Yep.
it's not where the vitamins are
You know,
for the most part.
my favorite example, and this is going to sound again like some Aikido heresy, my favorite example of really well-honed Aikido is Kyuza Mifune's judo.
Yes.
He is so tight and precise with small movements. It doesn't even look like he's moving, and he is doing incredible manipulation, incredible
He
reaction, contact, all of
yeah,
that.
he was phenomenal. He's
Yeah.
one of my early martial arts inspirations, actually. Obviously my direct teachers, that goes without saying, but in terms of influences from his history, Mifune was an influence on me long before any Aikidoka was. And it comes down to, like you say, how he moves. And he doesn't move like the judo of Mifune is, I hate to say dead, but I have heard rumors, which I can't substantiate, that around the time of Mifune's aging and eventual passing, there was an ideological shift in the way that judo was being taught. I've long felt that this shift in pedagogy came from the early Olympics, and there were a couple Europeans that were really scary to the judo. They kind of had a crap moment, and the shift from high technical precision went from, you got to be good technically, but we really got to start hitting the gym. And this developed, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the gym. Not saying that. In fact, I'm a huge proponent of fitness, even for Aikidoka. But what I am saying is that the model then became, get jacked and then do the judo. And I obviously that works for people. And I'm not saying that the Olympic judoka aren't freakishly good at judo. I'm not saying that. I hope nobody walks away from that thinking that I am. But what I am saying is that some of that has bled down to kind of the hobbyist and casual enjoyer level. And I think there's a lot of technical detail that now sometimes gets left out of judo because there's this background assumption that you're also going to be in really good shape. And I think Mifune kind of was the last, I guess, he was the last rung on the ladder who was kind of all in the technique. And he kind of had to be, because look at the guy. I mean, I know that the video that we have of him is, he's kind of old and he's starting to look old. He was never a large man. And I know that there was a video several years ago about people that really famous video of him. They're like, oh, the randori is fake, and it's like, first of all, this man is like 71 or 80 or something ridiculous at this
Mhm.
age. So first of all, obviously his uke are working with him. Nobody's saying that they're not. But if you do a 30-second Google search, you're going to realize that people contemporary to him were like, I keep getting stuck in this guy's Yokoguruma, or I keep getting stuck in this guy's. He was. You don't put it this way. You do not get the moniker the God of Judo by being a fake.
Right.
That's not and people would know that if they just did so. I'm not saying that like you're seeing peak Mifune in some of the film that we have of him, because the dude's geriatric, and we're all gonna become geriatric at some point.
Yeah.
But the point isn't what he's doing in that video. The point is just imagine what he was even 20 years previous to those videos. He was
Yep.
probably a monster. Not to go too far down the Mifune rabbit hole,
Hmm.
but yes, I would agree with you. His judo is done in a very Aikido fashion,
Yep.
and the commentary that some of you that Ueshiba and Kano sometimes had about each other, what little that there is, it makes sense to me too that some of their students cross trained and they really didn't seem to see a
Hmm.
whole lot of difference with the underlying principles,
Hmm.
just the technical expression. Um,
And that path to ultimate minimal efficiency is
yes,
is it goes beyond that just copying. You have to,
yes,
the copy starts to give you the feel. Once you
yes,
have the feel, then you start to pare down and look for wasting less motion.
right.
And yeah, yeah.
Which is another tradition that I wish that we as Aikidoka would kind of rob and just mug judo of it, in the sense that like there are these judoka out there who I'll use a recent example. There's this guy who just recently retired. I want to say in 2022 from the judo circuit, and he has this uchimata. It's Ono Shohei. If you're watching and you're a judo person, you know who that is. And the first of all, he's like chimp strong, so that always helps. But he also has this uchimata where he can almost get like 180 degrees. Like his head is at his ankle, his other ankle is almost straight up, and no one really does it the way he does. And when people talk about his uchimata, it's also always prefaced by somebody say it's the Ono uchimata. It's the it's his.
Mhm.
We don't really have that notion in Aikido where it's like, oh, so and so sensei, that's so and so sensei Shihonage. He's made it his own.
Mhm.
And I think that should be something that we implement, just because it's we do have a problem with copy and paste. I've noticed that a lot of people will be like, oh, it's we don't have that because we just want to wholesale recreate things. Whereas in
Mhm.
judo, you recreate things up to a point, but it has to be your own at some point. If you aren't doing something a little bit different, um, you fail actually at randori typically, because a lot of those guys, especially at that level, will read you like a book. They
Mhm.
know what you're doing if you're doing it standard. And deception and personalization, I think, are the bread and butter of martial competency, insofar as you don't throw a jab expecting to knock someone out. Typically it's the punch that's coming 4 punches down the road that's supposed to
Mhm.
do the damage, and everything between there might be uniquely you, whereas as opposed to your teacher or something like that. Which is why some of the commentary about like that doesn't look like Aikido, and that kind of thing kind of bugs me from a martial standpoint, because it shouldn't. If
Mhm.
you if you're doing exactly what you think Aikido looks like, I guarantee the other guy knows what you're doing.
Mhm.
That's it. It should never look like anybody's martial art except your own, and that's true in Aikido and in Judo. Now, I will say with the caveat that beginners need basics. I'm not saying beginners should be going off into the weeds and making up their own crap, because that's a great way to produce subpar martial artists. But there is a certain point in a given system, and that ranges. In BJJ, it might be like late blue belt, purple belt. in Aikido dojos, it depends on how many Q ranks you have and things like that. But I typically start looking for it a belt or two before Shodan. It's
Mhm.
like at what point does this start to become yours? And for me, maybe nobody else proctors tests that way, but when I happen to have the honor to be on a testing board, I'm usually looking for like not does that perfectly look like on a Shodan test, Shodan Nidan, that kind of thing. When I'm looking at people, it's not do they meet the requirements verbatim? It's have they are they self-aware enough to have adapted what we're doing to them? No two Shodan Nidan tests should really look the same. Not in the same way that two seventh Q tests or whatever should look pretty much the same. So,
It occurs to me that this is almost a byproduct of the demonstration Aikido, where,
mhm,
and I can't count the number of practitioners I've seen whose priority is not on, can I take 2, 3, 4 techniques and really make myself super good at them. They'll say, I need to memorize everyone in the curriculum. If an instructor says, I want to see this attack with that technique, I want to be able to throw that combination out and have it be decent and solid.
yes.
Back when I was competing, every top level competitor did 2 to 3 things, maybe 4, so
Yep.
crazy good that if
Yep.
they did it, and even you knew they were going to do it, it had a very high chance of working. They didn't
That's
go and collect 2 dozen different techniques and try to pull
right.
them out of the bag like some crazy golfer dragging 2 bags with them. They were so good
Yep.
at just a couple of those things, and they knew how to put them together just right, and that's what won. That was unstoppable. I don't want to say unstoppable. They were stoppable, but if you didn't know what they were about to do and have a damn good answer for it, you're done. And
That is
that's what I relate
Olympians.
when you say about making
Yeah,
something, internalizing a technique like that.
for sure. I think that the early ranks in in the Aikido system, if we forget about the aesthetics problem and whatnot, let's just pretend that it's already martial.
Mhm.
It's a good fantasy, but let's pretend that it's fine. It's well, fantasy is what we deal in, right? So
You got that right.
the let's let's um let's just assume that everything is kosher on the martial side in a given system. But the first several ranks I always conceive of you're learning your grammar and your vocabulary. You're
Mhm.
you're trying to be literate. And the literacy does help. Like, don't get me wrong, Olympic level judoka know the whole curriculum. They
Mhm.
know what can come out, and they're probably better than most people at the whole curriculum too.
Mhm.
However, they are only Olympic level at 2 to 4 techniques.
Mhm.
That's it. And you are correct. There's a handful of guys out there. I was just speaking with a friend who was visiting, and he was watching some of the Judo Olympics as they aired several months back, and he was like, "Man, there's this one guy who comes out and like every single time, he does the exact same thing to everybody, and they have to know it's coming. They just can't stop it."
Yeah.
And
The
that's
magic is in the setup.
yes,
It's in tricking the
yes,
person into thinking something else is going to happen, even when they
yes,
know it's going to happen, and they
yes.
you do it to them, and
Yes. Well, and I think that, that level of I don't want to get too far into the conceptual weeds here. But if you listen to some of the stuff that Uesha was talking about, I'm not talking about the ultra nationalist ranting and raving, that's something different. But if you listen to some of the technical things that he talks about and whatnot, I think part of Aiki that is as a concept that is underdeveloped in Aikido is this kind of intellectual side where or maybe intellectual is not the right word. We'll say mental. Where in the reason that Aikido, well, one of the reasons why I believe that martial Aikido should be functional is that you are constantly leading people into positions where or have a very good guess about what they're going to do before they're going to do it.
Mhm.
And it is that understanding that allows you to apply the techniques consistently. It's not the only reason why you can apply techniques consistently, but the idea is like if I get this person in this position, he has one of 3 options. And because through experience, I know that option 1 probably like 70% chance he's going to do that. Because I have that understanding, I can therefore beat him to the punch and apply this technique. And that's basically the strategy that these judoka are using. It's like, if I get in this grip, he's going to do X, Y, or Z, and I have an answer that leads back to my favorite technique for every
Yeah.
single one of those eventualities.
Mhm.
Again, Aikido doesn't really have that. And we need to implement, I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because we are going to talk a little bit about systemization.
Yeah, we're going to
Um,
get into it deep. So
yeah,
yeah,
but this is one of those spoilers. This is one of those things that we don't do well. And it's like we need to systemize Aikido in a way that that judo kind of does. And it's not just judo. BJJ does this too. You get in a position or you're trying to pass guard and you know that like the common defenses to this guard pass are X, Y, and Z. And so then you have to have an answer for X, Y, and Z. And early on, you might have to think step through step how to do each of those things. But eventually, it just becomes integrated into who you are and your training, and you don't even have to think about it. And that's
Mhm.
really the goal. Of course, the goal beyond that goal is to be able to articulate it and then pass it on to people effectively. But to go back to that demographic problem, we need good teachers. But the step one is getting to that point. And right now, we don't train in a way that develops people who have any kind of underlying strategic systematic doctrine for applying what we do. It really is kind of, here's a stimulus, some stuff happens, and then the technique. And the stuff that happens usually is like Shomanuchi. So
Right.
like, fine, Shomanuchi is great for people who, because it is a complicated art. It's fine for people who come in with two left feet. You
Mhm.
know, that's great. A lot of people for a lot of their early career are just trying to figure out where to put their hands, where to put their feet,
Which way to
how to
turn,
fall,
all that
which way to
stuff.
turn. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, and I think the Shomanuchi Yokomanuchi stuff, it's very good at taking out. It's very good about taking out like extra complications that, frankly,
Yeah, the
right?
variables.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They don't need to worry about that stuff early on.
Mhm.
They really don't. It just complicates things. But
Yep.
eventually, you want to graduate, and we
Right.
don't. So
You can only really go after the ABCs so long before you need the words, then need the vocabulary, then the grammar, then
right,
the
exactly. The ABC song is great, but you won't be writing Shakespeare if that's all you ever learn.
That's right.
So
That's
you won't
right.
be reading Shakespeare if that's all you ever learn.
Well, one of
So
the
yeah. Go
yeah, and
ahead. Sorry.
I think with this, I wanna actually touch on a question that one of our, forum members had, and I'm going to use a word that really needs some definition because this gets thrown around a lot with
Mm,
Aikidoka, and it raises the hackles of quite a few of them, and that is resistance training.
mhm,
And the reason that I think the resistance is the wrong word, because when we
mhm,
think of resistance, we almost imagine two sumo wrestlers being huge and crashing into each other, like that's what resistance is. And I think clarifying and defining that, in that what we need to see, and that is a tiered transition into, your uke is not there to throw one attack and then stop with his arm hanging out and let you take your 3 or 4 or 5 turns while he just goes along for the ride.
yes.
And at higher levels, you want to have a level of motion and seize initiative so fast and definitively that uke is now he's basically trying to keep up with the connection that you've just established.
Yes.
And I get that there's a time when you're walking people through their ABCs where you're not throwing big vocabulary and grammar at them. But the resistance part comes when, what happens when you've got your ABCs down? What happens when you want to start dealing with, okay, somebody throws a punch, they didn't connect, they're retracting. Or now you get comfortable with that. Now, what happens if uke counters? What if they try to evade your technique? What happens if they throw a second or third technique? To have it be, I think I like the term live practice or live
Mhm,
training, where you're
yeah.
dealing with an actual live interactive uke, not just a robot that throws one
Yes.
attack and then and is done.
Yes.
Um, and with this, the forum member was asking that about Tamiki Aikido. That Tamiki um, Aikido has a competitive format. They haven't this active live component, and they asked, well, what, in your opinion, does the Tamiki approach do right, and what does it do wrong? And I thought that was a great topic discussion. So I'm looking forward to getting into that and even into just live training in general.
So there's a lot to cover there. So I'll start with Tamiki, with the Tamiki stuff. I'm a long, I guess, first and foremost, before, as I do have, there's a subset of my followers that are huge into Tamiki. I always appreciate their presence and input. And I always like to start my conversations with Tamiki that while I have been a big advocate for it, I have yet to step into a dojo. I'm happy to say that I'm very acquainted with Yoshinkan, very acquainted with Aikikai. Tamiki is the last of kind of the big three organizations. I know there are others. If there's anybody watching out there, and I'm not naming your org, cool it. I know that there are others. There are other ones out there, but those are kind of the big three in my conception of things. I haven't had a chance to train there yet. Someday, hopefully in the next couple of years, I can figure out how to squeeze that in. So keep in mind that everything I'm about to say is coming from an outsider perspective, but I have watched a lot of film. I have interacted with Tamiki Aikido people. I've trained with them, and I think I'm up to date on all kind of the theoretical literature and things like that from Tamiki himself and some of his students. So that's my disclaimer. My preface on speaking about Tamiki Aikido is this. It is, in my opinion, the best sparring that we have in Aikido. That also has to be qualified by saying it's the only sparring that we have in Aikido. So the bar is set kind of low. And again, I know that there's some these obscure kind of offshoots that also do sort of sparring, but Tamiki is the most formalized and it's the most standardized across an entire style, right? It's kind of the sparring that we have. And I also think, again, to kind of hint at the incoming discussion about strategy and doctrine, Tamiki Aikido made the wise decision, the smart decision of kind of importing a lot of the theory behind Aikido, the tsukuri, the kake, the kuzushi, all of these terms and things. That was smart. And finally, there's no rule set that's perfect, right? There's always contrivances in every single rule set, and each individual just kind of has to either come to terms with those contrivances or understand that they're willing to put up with them because the benefits are still there. But there is no perfect rule set, and I've offered a couple on my channel, and those aren't perfect. Obviously I'm biased. I'm a little bit more married to my ideas than I am than maybe some outsiders are, and that's fine. That's just how it's going to break down. So those are kind of what I would say before I now become devil's advocate and criticize Tamiki Aikido a little bit, as much as I am typically in its corner. The first thing I would say is that in that sparring format, the knife work is weird. I've never liked the knife work. And I know that the Tamiki exponents or proponents rather will say that well there's two types of sparring in Tamiki Aikido. There's the one where both people are open hand, and then there's the one where one person has a knife and the other person is open hand, and they kind of switch halfway through. The issue I take with the knife work is that it is just a prop to bring out the Aikido. I am not a weapons person, but I have had the opportunity to be in the same room as weapons people, and to a certain degree, I don't think it takes a detective to understand that the knife is not just a thrusting weapon. And in fact, that the way that Tamiki guys apply their knife work and score points in that sparring format, it's almost like a point sparring karate reverse punch with a knife in your hand. And that just strikes me as really silly. Because again, you're not gonna like do this really exaggerated thrust, even if that is all you do for some weird reason. That's the first thing. Second thing is you can cut on the way out, you can cut on the way in. And cutting does not require a whole lot of force, assuming that weapon is well maintained. It doesn't take a whole lot to cut people. If it's a sharp enough knife, they can be pretty bad at cutting, and you're still going to get cut. On top of that, someone who knows what they're doing with weapons are not going to, they're going to be trying to sneak that up under your rib cage or through the rib cage, or they're going to try to cut an artery, or they're not, the targets are just different. So that's the first thing. And I'm not saying that, oh, well, that's where I hate the argument when people say, well, Aikido's for fighting untrained people. That's respectfully a load of horseshit. Um, every martial art is great at defeating untrained people. What you are saying is there is no bar. um, if you're worried about training or defeating untrained people, then great. If you can defeat trained people, you should be fine. You can kill two birds with one stone there. So the notion is like, oh, well, they're an untrained knife attacker. Cool. But even then, if a knife attacker is attacking you in, say, a self-defense situation, and they've already made the determination that they want to harm you, you will probably never see the knife before you've been cut or it's sticking out of you. I would not recommend people go down this rabbit hole because it's a little murky and macabre. But there is a 1950s, I believe, video, and it's an assassination of a Japanese prime minister that was on live television, and the knife attacker that killed this guy just puts the knife close to him and runs up and basically football tackles the guy, and that's the stab that killed him. If a knife attacker wants to harm you, you won't see him coming, most likely. You'll be lucky if you do. So the whole notion that somebody pulls out a knife and maybe they're trying to mug you or something, that's a little bit different, but then just give them your wallet for Pete's sake. But this kind of movie setup where I'm going to draw my knife and then say provocative things about you, and then we're going to fight. That's not a thing. And beyond that, the knife work that I would expect from someone that knows their way around a knife is not present in the Tamiki system. My recommendation for Tamiki in that sense would be one of two things. A, make that knife alive, bring in people that know what knife work is, and adapt that rule set. Or, and this is the direction I would go, just stick to the format where both people are open-handed. The reason I would stick to that anyway is just because for outside viewers who don't know what the hell they're looking at, the optics are better. You add, when there's asymmetry between competitors, one person has a weapon, one person doesn't. If you sit someone down who doesn't know what they're looking at, it's just confusing. If you sit someone down who watches like judo, even if they don't know the rules at all, it's very intuitive who's winning and who's losing most of the time. There's a couple caveats with that. Recent judo, there's a stalling problem and gamifying of points and clocks and things like that. I'm not really talking about that. The reality is, person gets thrown, points get awarded, easy. The knife just kind of throws a wrench in casual viewers' conceptions of what we're doing. And again, I don't see the sparring here as just a training method, but also as a marketing method. And I think Aikido misses that component. So that's my first thing about the Tamiki sparring. The other thing I dislike is the rule that dictates that you have to clench at elbow. Like, you can grab someone's elbows. I think you can bicep tie, so you can go up the arm a certain amount, but there's no clinch beyond that. There is no close range clinch. To me, there is a parallel. I told you I'd bring up BJJ again. There is a parallel there between BJJ and this rule set, in the sense where I'm not necessarily opposed to guard pooling in sport if a person approaches me, gets their grips, and drags me into that position, because they have imposed that position upon me. They have earned it. It is now up to me. If I didn't want to be there as the defender, I shouldn't have let them get there. Now it's up to me to get out. However, I am against guard pooling where someone just sits down and is like, approach me, and relies on the rules to force me to do something that martially I would never do. That's stupid. I know he wants me to approach him. From a martial standpoint, that's leaning too far into the rules to make progress, and you aren't learning a skill. The clinch rules in Tamiki Aikido then are of the same essence to me, in that if you want to make the statement that that's the range that Aikido happens at, fine. I'm willing to accept that, at least to a certain degree. But you also have to accept that pretty much no one stops their clinch if they want to clinch you at your elbows. If you take two 6 or 7-year-old toddlers and tell them to throw each other, it's amazing how quickly they find underhooks and collar ties and
Mhm.
body locks without even understanding what those concepts are. I'm not saying they'll know what to do when they get there. I'm not saying it'll look pretty, but those positions are just intuitive. They can feel the leverage in their body just from the kinesthetic feedback. They don't stop at your elbows. For
And
me,
footage of actual fights
yeah,
shows that definitively. Nobody stops.
yeah,
In fact,
yep,
I
no
remember,
one stops.
I think this was an interview with um, I think it was a BJJ instructor who was being asked about things like Wing Chun, where he
Hmm.
said, you know, the whole concept of trapping range
Hmm.
just doesn't exist in an actual fight. You're either pouncing on somebody or you are dancing around at extreme range, but you don't stop in that trapping range and
Right.
exchange. And I think that's the same version of what you're talking about.
I would definitely say that, like, I think that range exists, but it's fleeting.
Very fleeting.
It's a transitional thing. And the what I have a problem with then is that this rule is great for bringing out Aikido in a
Hmm.
sense where, like, it looks in many ways at least closer to that demonstration that we talk about. And
Hmm.
to an untrained eye, it makes a certain amount of sense. I think for more advanced martial artists, they look at it though and they realize that that artificially props up this fleeting range. Again, my recommendation to this then is that if Aikidoka want to be in that position, if they want that range, they must earn it. And what I mean by that is you have to, if it's against a striker, for example, you need to know how to close range. If it's against a close range clincher, the judoka, the wrestler, whatever, then you need to know how to disengage from that person. And again, even in that situation, that range is still going to be fleeting. But if you're good about knowing how to transition between all, like, distant and close, every time you transition, you're going to buy yourself more moments in that
Right.
ideal range. And eventually, the hope is that something sticks. The
Hmm.
problem is that, okay, great, we've identified that maybe this is the range where Aikido best lives, but there's not really many Aikidoka today that can get there and against a resisting trained opponent impose those parameters upon that unwilling opponent. So, and in that sense, I know that I've brought up, like, Aikidoka should probably know how to know a little bit about close range clinching. They should know a little bit about a close range grappling art, and they should know a little bit of striking. And I've had some interesting criticisms about that. There's no time for that. And I'm like, there has to be, because if nothing else, you need to be at least semi-literate in the language of your attackers. And
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, but this notion of, I really hate the notion that a lot of people put out where it's like attacks have to be committed, they have to be authentic, and then these authentic attacks are these, like, haymakers that are movie haymakers where people
Hmm.
swing and it's and slow. That's not a committed attack. That's just a stupid attack. It's great for the camera, and
Yeah.
we as Aikidoka do not get to choose what is authentic and inauthentic. The attacker does. If they are a judoka and they grip you, that is their authentic attack. You have to deal with that. It goes back to that Aikido premise of you don't choose, you don't dictate the energy.
Hmm.
You simply react. And I do think that simply reacting is a problem. Again, we're going to get to that strategic doctrine piece of the conversation. But at the very least, when people are like, it needs to be an authentic attack, the Aikidoka is not part of that conversation. We have no power over what is authentic or not. We can only develop strategies to deal with whatever's given us. What I can say is, with the advent of MMA, with the advent of the internet, quite frankly, there's a lot of people out there who don't know how to fight, but they kind of have a rough idea of what a fight, quote unquote, should look like.
Hmm.
It doesn't take much for an untrained person to be like, I'm going to grab this guy's leg and single leg. It might be the shittiest single leg you've ever seen, but they're still going to do it because in their mind, that's what a fight looks like.
Hmm.
You should probably know how to defend a single leg. At
Absolutely.
least get
Or
out of
even
one.
just a tackle. I mean, how many
A
people have
tackle,
had
something.
brothers that fought in
Yeah,
the, horsed around in a schoolyard or whatever.
right. So, this notion that we lean into rules that artificially prop up situations that aren't realistic. I don't like that. Not in BJJ, not in judo, not
Mhm.
in Tamiki Aikido. And I understand the position, like, well, it's a sport. But also, I think about it from a marketing angle, and it's like most people who are untrained and might want to get into your martial art eventually kind of see combat sport as an analog for real fighting. Now, that's problematic. I'm not saying that it's not a flawed point of view, but it doesn't matter because that's what people believe.
Mhm.
And I really am a big believer that if you want to market anything effectively, you have to answer customers, clients, future students on their own terms. You don't say buy my vacuum cleaner because it's the best vacuum cleaner ever. You identify that someone has a very particular problem, and then you solve that problem. And
Mhm.
for the customer, the potential student, they see combat sport as an analog for fighting. Again, it's imperfect, but this is the reason why silly guard pooling is so unpopular with such a broad swath of the internet, because people know that attackers do not come out, give me all your money, and then sit down.
Mhm.
Don't do
Yeah.
that. That's not
Yeah.
a thing.
Yeah.
Nor is it really a valid strategy most of the time to sit down when you're being mugged. Maybe you could make a very specific niche argument about doing it when you know there's one person or something like that. I won't get into the mechanics of that. That's for a BJJ podcast. But my point is that people understand that it doesn't represent reality. And I feel that elbow length positioning, which may in spirit, in essence, have some truth to it, should not be a means to an end. And if I had to make any overarching criticisms of the Tamiki sparring system, it's that it's a great first step. I don't think it goes far enough.
Mhm.
Um, I would want to see a rule set that does deal with close range clinching, does deal with striking. And I know striking kind of freaks Aikido people out a little bit. I come from a fairly heavy contact karate background, so like blocking punches with my skull is a Tuesday to me. Um, but and for some people, like, oh, it's brain damage. I don't know. I don't know how many brain cells I've lost in my 25 years. But I'm not saying that you have to spar in such a way where we're trying to take each other's heads off. If you
Right.
look at someone, I'm going to throw out a popular channel, Jeff Chan's MMA Shredded YouTube channel. He spars with intensity,
Mhm.
but most of the time, unless he's training with someone who is just kind of a prick, they aren't trying to kill each other
You
in
can
that
see the
intense
level
sparring.
of restraint and control.
Exactly, and that's all I'm aiming for. I'm not, even if you don't want to compete, I'm just saying that that's the level that I'd like to get to in the
Mhm.
dojo. Forget about competition or whatever. If I think if people want to compete, then there should be an outlet for them. But that's the ideal for in dojo sparring that I'd like to get to, and I think we're
Yeah.
many years out from that. But
Well,
that's
and
kind of
it is a
where I'd like to
staged
be.
thing where you can do it lightly, slowly,
Mhm.
or at a pace that's not frantic. Because if you once you start turning frantic, no matter how skilled you are, what you're doing just goes to
Yes.
garbage. And
Well,
so, and if you do it in graduated ways, you start that stress inoculation aspect of
correct.
training where you get used to the pressure and you're like, okay, it's another Tuesday. I got somebody swinging at my head. I'm not worried about my safety. I need to learn to watch the stimulus, respond,
Yep.
take initiative, get that positioning, have your body doing what you're supposed to be doing. All of those things are tremendous. And I've found with students in my dojo, they like it. Like it's fun because they
Yes.
know they're not getting hurt. They know that they're safe, but they're challenged. And not one of them comes away, even from the slowest of live work, and says, "Oh, that was easy." They're like, "Oh
Yep.
man, I need to do better." And they're in that right space.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's many ways, and I think this is a growing consensus among people of our mindset. I'm very certain I've heard Aikido Silverdale Duncan speak on it before about graduated levels of sparring and things like that. And there's many different ways and approaches that you can take that. I have my own ideas, and I'm not saying that any given one is wrong. And in fact, I would say that different people learn different ways, and this is a frontier right now. Try different things. I hope I never come across in this podcast or in my own content as trying to push definitive Aikido. Nothing is worse than the whole stupid true expression purity spiraling
That's not
nonsense.
Aikido.
That's not Aikido. I hate that.
I hate it too.
We're all on the same side. I don't want to inject religion too much into an Aikido podcast. But one of the parallels I always draw is like in America in particular, there's all these different denominations of Christianity, and that oftentimes they don't really get along with each other. But I always kind of chuckle to myself because like you guys believe the same core things. You're arguing about minutia, and I get it. And in their mindset, it's a matter of the soul. I get where they're coming from, but I see similar parallels in Aikido where it's like we're all on the same team. Why are we fighting each other so much? It's like even the Yoshinkan and Tamiki Aikido or Aikikai guys, I've had comments where it's like, you're talking about competition. What did Ueshiba say about competition? I'm like, well, first of all, remarkably little, actually. But second of all, who cares? If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. We don't have to have this weird tussle in my comments section about, and usually I don't tussle with those people. I just like, okay, bye. I'm not, I'm happy to have conversations with people, but not when it comes to these weird subjective takes on what true Aikido is, because neither of us are walking away better Aikidoka from that conversation. It's a waste of time. I'm just not interested. It bores me. But to get back on track here, there's many gradual systems that people can use. And I've heard many on the podcast before, and I have my own ideas about that. Again, we will get into strategic doctrine, but I would say that if you wanted to be more like traditional to the Japanese martial arts, the traditional like sword styles, many of them, what they'll do is they'll be like, we have these sets of 20 kata, and then we'll run through those sets of 20 kata. And then when you get good enough, then it'll be like kata 1. And then you do kata 1, kata 3, then you do kata 3, kata 17, and you're supposed to flow into these things naturally. And then the next graduated level of that is that you start doing kata, but then the kata's slight changes. Maybe it's an overhead strike the first time, but this time it's a like a kiri kaishi. It's a diagonal cut or something, and the uke is expected to react to that in real time. And eventually, those preordained movements gradually fade into complete live sparring over time. That is the truly traditional way of using kata, at least in the paired format. And if you wanted to do something like that in Aikido, fine. I think that the kata have to reflect a certain amount of martial realism. I'm not really saying I wouldn't use Shomenuchi, for example, as my base. But maybe a big cross. Big crosses are synonymous with fighters and things like that. So you could use that if you wanted to, or you could use graduated systems like I've seen proposed on here before, where it's like, look, it's just games basically. Grab my wrist and let's see if I can get out. And I know that there's corners of the internet that think that like gamified drilling with various forms of resistance is new. It's not. Not only has that been around in like proper education for the 60s or 70s or something like that. But I forget which guy proposed it, but doesn't matter. It's been around even in martial arts for a long time. There's tons of anecdotes of Aikidoka, and a lot of the early martial arts exchanges in Japan were like, I'm going to grip you this way. Can you get out? And if you do, you win. And if you don't, that was kind of what sparring was before it became formalized as sparring. That's great too, and that is technically traditional. There's a long historical precedent of it. If tradition matters to you, you're not breaking any rules. Tradition doesn't matter to me as much. I envision innovation as being part of a living tradition. What matters to me is that what we do is growing out of growing out of a tradition and is not arbitrarily chosen, but is a development that enables the things that we want to see happen, if that makes any sense. It's a
Yep.
natural progression. I think reiterating tradition is kind of stupid as an end to unto itself. But if you want to keep it traditional, knock yourself out. Those are two methods that are have
Well,
tons of
one needs to
precedent.
understand the underlying goal and spirit of what was intended that created that tradition. To just copy it for the sake of copying it and not understand why it was done that way, that's
Right.
the disservice, I think, to the art. And I'd like
Well,
to jump in with something on Tamiki because I'm not
sure.
as familiar with the rule set of their sparring as you have,
Hmm.
but I have watched it. I've studied it.
Hmm.
We don't have any Tamiki in our area, so I don't even
Yeah,
have a dojo to go visit. There's not much
in
of it
my world.
here in the Midwest. But my observation is the sparring looks strange.
Yes.
It does not look like anything else, and it certainly doesn't look like an actual fight. It looks like
Right.
something, and you described it very well, and I would articulate it the exact same way. Is it's meant to bring certain things out, and it
Hmm.
creates limitations in order to do that. And and the only thing that I'll comment is that the randori that I inherited from the dojo that I trained in was, at least I was told this, was crafted by Tamiki. It was not a one-on-one sparring match like you would see a sport fight. It
Hmm.
was a nage and several uke who are trying to attack and overwhelm
Yep.
nage. And your job is to survive for a minute, 2 minutes, however long. Uh, I found that to be invaluable, and it also seemed to me that the most, if you really want to train somebody as close to reality as you can, you need those, what would they call them? The two different goals. You have the person who wants to be peaceful and the attacker that wants to exploit the other person.
Right.
That is the difference between what is a consensual duel fight between two agreeable people that both want to fight and somebody who doesn't want to fight, wants to get the hell out of there, and somebody else who wants to take advantage of them.
Right.
And within that, if I were to do it, and I've done this, I played with this with my students, and it really drives home the one thing that a sport fight lacks, and that is who starts it and when. And this is why when I've looked at footage and even heard of accounts of professional fighters that get beat in street fights, it's because it's not their lack of ability, skill, athleticism, or even just brutality. It's the fact that they didn't know the fight started. The fight was over
Yep.
by the time they realized that there was a ghost, there was no ref to say, all right, fight. It was blam, they got ambushed and knocked out
Yep.
quickly. So they probably had superior athleticism, superior skills, but the other person made the first move. And
Yep.
this is going to bridge shortly, not quite yet, but almost into the Aikido strategic doctrine that we want to discuss. But the thing that I have a great deal of respect for Tamiki was that, as it was described to me, he was a teacher and he wanted to figure out a way to build that skill and ability in live practice.
Hmm.
And I love the way that he crafted the randori
Hmm.
training that I got. I see tremendous value in it, even if it's one on one.
Hmm.
One uke starts coming up and threatening you, and you have to think, who's going to start this? And
Hmm.
if I do start it, what do I do? Where do how do I
Yep.
respond? And maybe 50% of the time, uke takes his swing, and you have to respond and seize initiative back because you lost it. Or maybe you do maybe a little bit of scenario training where somebody says, I'm gonna slit your throat, and you say, that's go time. I'm gonna initiate contact because I'm not gonna sit here and wait till you pull out a knife and you throw it at my neck, or stab it towards me, or what have you. So I really like Tomiki's mindset approach of how do I
Yes.
solve this problem. But I
Yes.
agree with you. From what I've seen, I don't know if it's better than anything else I've seen for that lacks live practice, right?
Yes.
It's better than
It
that.
it was a fantastic progression, and that's what I would call it. That's how I would use it, as a progression.
Right.
Limitations are great for slowly and gradually introducing something. But I
Hmm.
do think that while Tamiki Aikido is in many ways the spearhead of kind of what we should imitate, we also need to recognize that there needs to be something yet beyond it. Um, and that's kind of my general take on it. I would probably use their format in my dojo, but it would be an intermediate kind of thing
Hmm.
for people that are uh, they're getting ready for that sparring, but
Hmm.
it helps people learn certain kind of underlying principles that, like, maybe that is the range that we really want to be at, so they kind of integrate into their brains that, yeah, this is where I need to be. But then, whatever comes after, they have to learn how to get there on their own terms,
Yeah.
rather than, well, the limitations enable this, as opposed to my skill enables it. So that's where I'm at with Tamiki. It's great. I think they have a lot of takes on uh techniques and things individually too that I
Hmm.
really like. I draw quite a bit of inspiration from. There's a couple other nitpicks that I could make about the system. I don't. If you're in a gi, I feel like gi grips should be allowed. For example, they basically do a no gi art, but in a gi, which is weird. Again, that's kind of weird optics too for
Sure.
the trained eye. Especially with judo's popularity, people will look at that and be like, why are they not just grabbing the material? But that's kind of a nitpick. You could just as easily throw on a rash guard like the BJJ people do, and that goes away.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of this and a bit of that, and
I can see having your art not be reliant on grips or reliant on a gi,
yeah,
but to say don't ever grab it seems to be overcompensating the opposite direction. Like,
yeah.
realize that somebody has a garment you can take advantage of. You couldn't do that.
Well, and less so in Tamiki Aikido. It seems to be. Well, no, because Ueshiba did it from time to time too. But
Hmm.
if we consider that the goal of Tamiki's limitations are to bring out certain types of Aikido, there are grips that Aikido could use on the gi. That, in particular, my favorite grip is that back lapel grip where
Mm.
your fingers are in. I
Mhm.
I really like that grip, and I know that some people could argue that it's not self defense, but I would just grab their hair. Then it's
Grab
the
their hair,
same.
or if they're wearing a hoodie.
Or if they're wearing a hoodie, right? So I mean, I disagree that it doesn't have any carryover. I would agree to the extent that it's like, yeah, you're probably not going to get as good a grip on
Mhm.
somebody who's in casual wear, maybe. But that is like very common Aikido grip for things like kokinage and
Mhm.
iminage to a certain degree, and
Sure.
maybe a couple other things too. But that doesn't come out in Tamiki Aikido. But they also don't really, like, I've seen demonstrations where they do it iminage, but I've not seen it as part of like the 17 core like scoring moves either. It's kind of in there as like a vestige remnant from when Tamiki was more in Aikikai orbit.
Mhm.
Um, so, but
I
I
think,
digress.
that's interesting because I personally think that Irimi Nage is gonna be the technique, and I know it's a family of techniques, but I really like Shomanate as well. But if there was a technique that's gonna redeem Aikido in terms of its reputation, it's a
Yep.
powerful Irimi Nage.
Yep. I would point to Iriminage, and I use this term lightly because the there's the freaking billion Kokinage, and no one knows what you're talking about unless you're actually qualifying it. But
Yeah.
there is a Kokunage that my system does that's kind of like you're on the way to doing an Ariminage, but
Okay.
you're, instead of actually doing the kind of classic over the head or up the
Mhm.
jaw, you turn them like it's an Ariminage, and then you cut an angle and you pull on that arm and that lapel, and they kind of fall backwards.
Okay. Kinda like
And
a Hikiatosh?
yeah, kind of like a Nike Tosh, but like I'm behind them, so I'm not like lifting
Right.
legs or anything. I'm
Right.
just using the momentum and the angle, and they're falling kind of over their ankle bone and their heel.
Mhm.
And that's another one that I use, and even when it kind of
I found
fails,
that
and
one, or what I refer to as a Hikitosh, I think you're describing kind of the same thing as
yeah,
being one of my Randori friendly techniques.
yeah, that's a great one, and it's a
Yeah.
great posture break too.
Yeah.
If it's also one of the rare Aikido techniques that you could go to another art and feasibly do on somebody without raising any alarms. If
Right.
you start arm barring people in standing position, people get touchy and freak out.
Oh yeah.
If you do that to people, they might think that that's weird, but you aren't going to have a high rank come over to you and be like, you can't be doing these illegal techniques, right?
Yep.
So I would agree with you. That is a great entry point. That's and for many reasons, actually, if I had to going back to what we were talking about specializing in techniques, that particular kokinage is probably one of two techniques that I would say would be my go-tos. So I
Nice.
mean that one and Sankyo
Mhm.
are my two favorites, and a lot of my stuff grows out of that. I'm
Yep.
not saying that I'm the best guy in the world at them, but uh, and the reason I actually picked up that kokinage is so I could take it into karate class. I
Nice.
could take it into judo class, and nobody would be freaking out at me for using it.
Yep. Well,
So
let's bridge into that Aikido's strategy doctrine, and for those who may or probably doesn't make sense exactly what we're talking about, but that is, and this is something that has bothered me for quite some time, and this relates back to my full contact competition days, and that is when you react to somebody else, you we used to call that being a counterpuncher, where you let your
mhm,
opponent take the first shot or move or what have you. You let them attack first, and you are waiting, and you choose the correct dodge, block, evasion, whatever you want to call it, and you counter. The counterpunching is a thing, but it's a very hard thing to do. It's high risk, and it takes a tremendous level of awareness, decision speed, eye perception speed, execution has to be pretty much flawless for it to work.
mhm,
From a self-defense standpoint, in my opinion, putting that much risk on yourself to do everything correct, get your timing correct, range correct, movement correct, evasion correct, deflection correct, appreciating your opponent's range correctly. Any one of those things goes wrong and you're done. You're toast
yes,
potentially. And I think Sun Tzu would appreciate this. If you are the ones that if you take initiative, you have the advantage.
yes,
And allowing your opponent to take that initiative in the hopes that you will seize it back is very risky.
yes,
And this, when people say, oh, Aikido is a defensive art, it's a responsive, it's a reactive art. In my opinion, if it truly is, then it does not abide by the basic tenets of strategy,
mhm,
and it is very high risk. I
yes,
think that Aikido, if you go back and you watch a Gozo Shiota, he did not wait for anybody to initiate contact against him. When
mhm,
I very carefully watch video of and film of Morihei Ueshiba, he did not do that either. He was always initiating contact. It may be very small. He would even do like these quick little lunge, like range closing things, which you can tell disturbs somebody. And
mhm,
I've played with that a bit in my own dojo and with my own training partners, and it does. Even kind of just a quick lurch and opening your eyes a bit can make somebody hesitate.
right,
I think that is what the Shodo Seizu, or control the first move, really means, and why it is a fundamental of Aikido. I know I was taught it as a fundamental. I don't know if everybody else was, but it's a fundamental of strategy and a fundamental of all combat, is that you want to take the initiative. You want to make the first move. That might not be a strike. It might not be an attack, but it has to show that you are interceding on what is turning into a bad situation and not
mhm,
just being passive. And so if there was one strategic philosophical problem I see with contemporary Aikido, is that it completely abandons that concept, or maybe not completely. There are, I'm sure, some pockets of here and there where people see some value in it, but it is not a main tenet. I think it should be. I think
oh,
that
for sure,
control that first move should be in every situation, even if it's just to, Lena, ask somebody a question. Why are you here? What are you doing? Even just asking somebody questions is taking initiative and taking control of an interaction.
mm. Yeah, I agree with you that Let me start at the beginning of your lead in there. So the counter punching idea, and it's in some ways I don't want to take away from all the drilling and technical sparring and things that people do to achieve what they do in striking. But as someone who's technically my base is in striking, I am happy to tell you just openly that a lot of what I do um is intuition. I I spar people, and I'm fairly well known for good footwork and being hard to hit and close range on, which is a skill I picked up on because I'm a small gremlin man, and it doesn't take much to hurt me in a way that will turn the tide of a match or of a confrontation. Um, but the other thing that people may not know about me is I wear glasses. I'm legally blind. I often don't even know what punch is coming before it comes. I just know because experience. So I can't even see. I don't even have the visual feedback a lot of the time because I spar with my glasses off, and I can't see more than a couple really inches in front of me clearly. So a lot of what I respond to in like striking sparring is just sense. It's just gut. And I probably one of the hardest things I have teaching people in those striking environments is like, how do you do what you do? It's a lot of sparring time. Um, and what I mean by that is I don't even think it's efficient to teach people. If somebody comes in to my class and is worried about self-defense and they're like, can you prepare me in 2 months? And if that's your answer to them, good luck. I can't teach you that instinct in
Mhm.
because instinct can't be taught. It's just I got that from 20 plus years of karate sparring. So there's that component to it. The other component to it is with striking, although there's great beauty in what they do, there is a certain level of variability that they don't get to enjoy that grapplers do. Or sorry, there is a certain level of variability in striking that they have to deal with that grapplers don't, rather. And to get more into kind of the strategic doctrine, at least my approach to these things is positions first. If you can get into a position and then work backwards and forwards from it, um, that is the best way, in my opinion, to go about it. And I'll clarify what I mean. So, if you can get into a given position on somebody in a grappling range, typically what a position does is two things. A, it sets up good attacks on your part. But B, it limits a person's responses maybe down to 3 or 4 things. And like we were kind of talking about earlier, the reason why a grappler like a jujitsu guy can see into the future a little bit is because when he practices these positions, he knows that you're going to do typically a number of things. Now, I'm not saying there aren't innovations. There's also body types that are weird. Like if someone's freakishly flexible, maybe they find a weird fifth option. But on average, there's certain reactions that are coming because there's only so many responses.
Well, I think Gracie Jiu-Jitsu even had a like an organizational map of from this
Flowchart.
position, these are
Yep.
the 2 things or 3 things that they're gonna do, and then if they do
And
that, then you do this, and they kinda have this
right.
little.
Well, and that's how I approach it. So I'll use an example, maybe one that you'll appreciate, because I did kind of steal this from wrestling, and it's in catch too. Um, and it's something I've been experimenting with, and I've noticed that it's nasty. I, I'm pretty confident that it works. And that is if I can get to a leg or get to a body lock and then move up into a half Nelson.
Mhm,
For anybody who knows what a half Nelson is, it's or doesn't know what it is, it's looping an arm under an arm and placing that hand on the neck. So it
mhm,
isolates an arm out here. Their arm should be kind of dangling like this. Now,
mhm,
in the standing position, you can turn out of it. So like you can if I'm here and that hand is pinning me, I can turn this way and get out of it.
mhm,
But I know that people will do that. So there's options here. If I have somebody in a half Nelson, what I like to do, I just said I was a Sankyo proponent, reach under and grab that Sankyo. If you have that Sankyo and they turn out of it, they turn right into the Sankyo.
Nice.
This is what I mean by setting people up and feeding them into things. And if they don't turn out of it, and for some reason they're okay being in this really compromised position, I have like 60 other options that I can explore.
And by the way, when you have that half Nelson put on you, the last thing you're thinking of is that hand dangling out there. You're not
Yes.
worried about that hand.
Well, historically in wrestling, it's used as like a turnover, which
Right.
I don't care about. I care about isolating the arm. Now, there's a number of other positions that I historically talk about on my channel that is about that Russian 2-on-1s,
Mm-hmm.
front headlocks, getting people to post on the ground. There's a number of ways, but for me, the positional advantage that I'm looking for is typically isolate arm, go from there, right? Then you build outwards. How do you get into that position, and what do you do once you're in that position? And that's a whole other thing. But for me, the strategic doctrine, it starts positionally, and this isn't new. BJJ preaches it, position before submission. Judo has less of a catchy way of talking about it, but they have the same thing. You got to get good grips before you can facilitate good attacks. It's the same kind of doctrine. So when you say take the first move, take the initiative, my thought process is my initiative needs to be getting into one of these positions.
Right.
That's the
And then
doctrine
it's just
that
a
I would
question of
dictate
when
on.
you decide, when's it my opportunity? When do
Yes.
I choose to go? And it's like almost like a sprinter at the starting blocks. You're waiting
Yep.
for that boom, you hear the gun, and then off you go.
Yes. Yes. So for me, and like if you saw me doing this stuff live, it would not look anything like the demonstration, which is fine by me. But I might catch a leg, catch a kick, get a body lock, move up to that half Nelson, apply the half Nelson, get my Sankyo position, and then go from there. And I'm not saying that people can't escape from this combination. Of course they can, but they have a much more limited range of options, and it's
You're
because I
making
am
them more
also
predictable by presenting them with
exactly,
only a couple of options,
exactly,
not a bunch of them.
exactly. And I think this, in many ways, is what facilitates good Aikido. Again, not to go back to that notion of what Ueshiba sort of would talk about early on, is like you need to be 2 steps ahead of this person. It's that it's that I know that I'm giving you options, but the secret is that they're all wrong.
Right. Yep.
It's like to a certain degree, I have an answer for every single one of them. And of
Mhm.
course, things happen in scuffles and whatnot. I'm not saying that it's impossible to get out of these. There's no such thing. There's always counterplay.
Mhm.
But the notion is that you want to constantly impose what BJJ would call dilemmas on
Right.
a person where
And if
every
your
single,
opponent is the one that's forcing you into those dilemmas, you will be at a disadvantage,
yes,
and odds are you
yes,
will not prevail.
right. And using that positional paradigm can also help the Aikidoka understand when they're losing and when
Mhm.
they're winning, which is something that we don't have very well in Aikido at all. A judoka who's experienced in gripping knows damn well when they are losing the grip fight and when
Right.
they should be on the defensive and they need to turn things
Mhm.
around. Aikido doesn't really have that by nature of that we mostly do kata practice in essence.
Well,
And
and if your uke
it's
is never actually ambitiously trying to take advantage of you,
right.
you'll never actually get the feeling of, okay, when am I an advantage, and when is my advantage being turned around and I'm at a disadvantage now?
Correct.
And yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I approach it. And other people may very well have different ideas. Again, I'm not trying to dictate the vector of what we're doing here.
Mhm.
I am a big advocate of people experimenting with their own things. I'm just saying this is what I've had the most success with. And if
Mhm.
people at home are wondering which positions that I typically would say are the ones that I would spend the most time on, uh, posting people's hands on the mat, however you want to do that, I don't care. Um, Half Nelson, Russian 2-on-1. Those are the
Yep.
three that front headlock, probably a close. Those are the four that I can replicate often.
Yep.
I'm
Those are
not saying
all
they all,
solid and sound.
yes, and
Um,
and they all already have a large body of strategic work done by other arts that you can pretty much just pluck
mhm.
and use verbatim. And I'm not saying that you always have to. In gi, for example, I have a lot of methods that I haven't seen anywhere else, and I'm not saying I invented them. I find that kind of arrogant rhetoric. I'm sure that someone else at some point in time has come up with them too. But I've got a couple gi tactics that are specific to the gi that I use that I don't think I've seen anywhere else, that it has to do with some irregular grips. I haven't posted them online. Someday I hope to. But
Yeah, I'd love to see
you
those.
can't you can invent clever ways of getting into these positions, but you don't have to if you're not interested. We got snap downs, we've got arm drags, we got all these other things that you can do to get to these positions, or you just use Aikido techniques to facilitate the same thing. I've recently used Kubinage as an example to get
Mhm.
people's hands to the mats in a video where you hook the head and you kind of just drop down. In
Yep.
demonstration, they fall over, but in practice, they'll probably post their hands on the mat. That's fine. That's a win for you. You're progressing the position. Another
Mhm.
good example is that Kokinage. If you do a Kokinage and they kind of turn and post themselves to catch themselves on the mat,
Yep.
fine, success. They've posted on the mat, arms isolated, go where you need to go. So
Yep.
there's a
I've
thousand
been
and
calling
one,
that a go-to position, that getting them on all
yes,
fours,
getting
because
them on
once
all
you're
fours.
there, you've got tremendous control and a lot
Right,
of stuff you can do there.
right.
And
And
that's how most
PS,
people go down. When we train to throw and uke goes rolling out, people don't normally roll out. A normal person's gonna go on all fours
yes.
to keep themselves from
And
hitting the ground.
I would say if everything else fails for you, I think you spoke to this when we were prepping for this podcast. And I think your question was something along the lines of if somebody came in and they were worried about their self defense in 1 month, what would I teach them?
Mhm.
I would teach them one of two things, and it would be contingent upon how much they want to flirt with legal problems. But if they want to be if they want to be relatively safe and look like a defensive reactor, then I would say get them on all fours and then drag them down into a Nikio position, like
Mm,
a Nikio pin position, and just hold them there.
sure.
I can do that regularly. Now,
Mhm.
obviously, that doesn't account for multiple attackers. I'm assuming that it's one guy,
Mhm.
but that's the pins are great. If it
Mhm.
is more than one person and you don't have the luxury of choosing to preserve the safety of the person who's trying to do harm to you, get them on all fours and knee the ever living hell out of them.
Mhm.
Call it a day. That's perfectly good Aikido. You don't need to be doing these big throws and whatnot. And that's true of like live resistance sparring, whatever. Too. People forget that if you're breaking someone's position and they're like in a parallel line with your knees and elbows are just awful. If
Mhm.
I were truly concerned with my safety, knees and elbows are my go-to every single time.
Yeah. And
And I can use
shins.
my Aikido to, yeah, shins. I can use my Aikido to facilitate those things. We are pretty good as Aikidoka about getting people to move in these relatively large arcs.
Mhm.
Um, get people to move in those arcs. Put on like a hijiate, get them to swing around, and as they're swinging around to face you, use their own momentum and to meet them with your elbow.
Yep.
Fantastic Aiki strike.
One of the
Um,
things. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean
no,
to
no, go ahead, go ahead. I
cut you
pretty
off
much
there
did my
because I
piece.
know we're running a little short on time, and there's
Yeah,
something that I was very excited about our discussion a few nights ago, and you were talking about the blue room, and I want to introduce this as a potential because you talk on your show, and you had a recent podcast about your vision of the future of Aikido and the future as martial arts go on. I really believe that martial arts overall are passing a threshold now, and we're leaving a lot of nonsense behind and having to reinvent the art. Not the Aikido the art, but a lot of martial arts are having to make themselves relevant,
hmm
and that's in the wake of the internet, not only in the wake of MMA, but also in the wake of COVID and a lot of dojos closing.
true.
Uh, and having to appeal to a new generation of young people because we can't just all have a bunch of old people in the art because, like you said earlier, it's just kind of dying off. And so, um, I liked what you said about the blue room, and I want you to go through your description for the listeners here.
Sure. So, it seems like a continuing theme here to use BJJ as a kind of a translation tool to a broader audience. But if anybody knows a little bit about BJJ history, there's this very famous gym, I believe, based out of New York City, that Rinzo Gracie runs called the Blue Basement. And the Blue Basement, it's still around, but it has this historical place in the kind of heritage of BJJ in the sense where like that's where a lot of these big champions that you see and guys coaches too bring up Danaher in a second, who they went through the Blue Basement. And a lot of what BJJ is today started in the blue basement through these freak athletes, these brilliant minds. It was this primordial goo that would eventually go on to define the art into what it is. It kind of took it from what it was in UFC 1 and now made it into in much the same. It made it into the BJJ that we kind of recognize today, and that's kind of been diversified since then. There's many gems now that are kind of taking that. There's 10th Planet, there's B Team, there's New Wave. The blue basement still exists, but at the time, all this talent was kind of in the blue basement. What the kind of analogy that I used was that, many years back, Danaher had his now famous, much memed upon "Why ignore 50% of the human body" interaction with Dean Lister, I believe, and he basically went into the blue room with this idea to systematize leg locking. Uh, and at the time, leg locking was this off meta, niche, kind of degraded, almost dirty tactic that people saw as inconsistent and not worth training. And Danaher said, no, there's precedent that this works. And he basically went into the blue basement, had access to all of these really high level athletes, which certainly helps. Aikido, unfortunately, doesn't have a super high level of athleticism, but that's fine. We can work around that. And he systematized this across 7 years, more or less, give or take. And he came out and changed the landscape of what BJJ was. You cannot talk now about competitive BJJ or even self-defense BJJ without at least having a footnote in there about leg locks and ankle locks. I see Aikido as in the same moment. This is our blue basement moment. If we know that the precedent exists for these techniques being martial, even if it's not in Aikido proper, it's not like Aikido owns these techniques. They're in the body of work in Japanese martial arts and actually in martial arts more globally. We know that there's a martial precedent for this stuff. It's just about going into the blue basement and systematizing it now. What I will say about what this means for people like me or listeners too is that if you want to be a part of this, the time is now. Every martial art goes through this kind of age where there are these innovators and contributors and folk heroes that rise up, and sometimes they're overly mythologized, not to their credit, but they make these contributions that make them famous, essentially, and their contributions are irreplaceable. So where I'm getting at with this is that no matter where you're at in life, maybe you are older, I would also keep in mind that Danaher himself, not a super great competitor. He has injuries. He was reportedly very good when he was young. He was a bouncer and things like that, but he's often not the best BJJ guy physically on the mat at any given time. But his contributions are strategic in nature. If you find yourself older, perhaps, or physically impaired, I'm not saying there's not a place for you. There absolutely is a place for you. And it's in this developing of the strategic doctrine. It's in this creative thought. It's in this, how do we approach these things and filling things out? So I'm not saying we need to get rid of that older demographic, which we have a lot of in Aikido, nor am I saying that older demographic needs to quit doing what they're doing necessarily. You can keep doing it and still contribute to this. There's not a zero-sum game. You can do both things. You can have your cake. You need it too. It's one of those rare instances in life that sometimes you can just do both. As for younger people, this is the time to get involved because you are the conduit through which these ideas will manifest. Some of us are getting older or are, injured, or just we're not going to be able to physically express these ideas as best we could. But you can. You're young and have a long career ahead of you. And while, of course, there is a certain amount of risk that you're taking on in terms of your time investment, we don't know how long it might take. For Danaher, it took 7-ish years to a decade to make the leg locks work. For Aikido, it might take longer. It is an investment. But I would also say that you typically don't invest in Google now. You wish you invested in Google in the 90s. uh, now is the time to buy stock. Now is the time to contribute to the project. I do think there is a bright future as long as we handle it carefully and collaboratively, and we don't fall into the same dogmatic spirals that our predecessors have. We have a great map for how not to do things, and we have plenty of inspiration to develop upon. The foundation is there. All we need is a little bit of creativity and a little bit of participation. This is a project that may take years to see come to fruition. However, I think it is very likely that many of us will be alive to see it to that fruition. We may not be able to participate in the competitions or the sparring in the same way that we might like to, but we can be part of a living tradition. Some people say that we need to rebrand Aikido, and I know that we wanted to finish on that topic, so I will leave you with this. I think the nomenclature is immaterial. If you want to call it Aikido, continue to call it Aikido. If you want to call it some other thing, that's fine. But what is indefensible is that whatever we come up with going forward, it will have come from Aikido. It is part of a living tradition in the same way that Aikido is an innovation and interpretation, a permutation on Daitodyu. If you want to say that what we're doing is the same thing to Aikido, that's fine with me. The vocabulary that we use to describe this project does not matter in the grand scheme of things. What matters is the outcome. We have been for too long worried and concerned with the shape of what we do, the appearance of what we do, the process of what we do, and even to a certain degree, too caught up in the trap of seeing how it's perceived. And perception is a symptom of how we manage our art, not the problem unto itself. If you want perception to get better, then the art must get better, and it's a matter of accountability. So
Very,
now's the
very
time to
true.
do that. Now's the time to do that. Now's the time to be creative. Now's the time to get young people involved and for them to not only make their own creative contributions and innovations, but again, be the face of some of the strategic aims and the doctrine and the things that we're changing. And for those of us who are maybe getting a little bit upper in age and we won't be able to represent it as well on the mat, we can still make contributions. I would implore people to draw inspiration from wherever is necessary and to avoid the very obvious pitfalls that we seem so attracted to, but we just can't do that anymore. I would distance ourselves from occultism. I would distance ourselves from ideologies that don't speak to people anymore. We have to meet people on their own terms. But I do think that there's more than enough potential for this to be a success. And it's just about careful management and getting people involved and being accepting of new ideas. And I know that's sometimes harder said than done. There will be disagreements, even among those of us who find kinship in one another. But I think that needs to be accepted. Decentralized growth is perfectly fine as long as the vector, at least more or less, is the same. We're all headed to the same horizon.
I
Take
totally
it
agree.
how we
In
get there.
fact, I wanted to add just one little thing, and that is I've
Sure.
met a number of people that love Aikido, or rather, they loved it, but it wasn't martial enough, and they went into other arts. I would love to see those people refan the flames of their love and passion for Aikido and
Yes.
kind of come back and bring what they've learned in the martial realms that they went and traveled to. It was sad to me to hear of people that said, I really wanted to have a practical art, but I just had to give up on Aikido.
Yes.
And with the evolution that I see coming in the future, there's going to be a practical art that is going to attract young people and get
Yep.
them active. And the old art that you described earlier in the show is probably going to become like a museum. It will be
Yep.
it'll always be there. It's never going to leave, and it's going to be like a tribute to a point in history, but
Yep.
it'll be like frozen in time. And
Yes.
as we know, with any military technology or martial technology, everything evolves. And I wish I had memorized Morihei Ueshiba's quote about there is no technique with Aikido. They're always evolving, and I want the art to evolve and constantly. And unfortunately, those words seem to have gotten lost in the
Very much so.
contemporary Aikido realm. And it's that love for Aikido and that attitude that I think the Aikido of the future, or whatever we call it, whether it gets rebranded or not, will have a home for those people that loved what Aikido really was about.
What I
And
will say,
yeah,
and this is the last point that I'll make because I know we are butting up against time here.
yeah.
But what I will say is that if you don't feel knowledgeable enough, or you don't feel like you have the technical background to contribute in a technical, strategic, tactical way, or you don't feel that you have the physicality to contribute in a certain way, keep in mind that this is an open door project. You can very much just goof around on the sidelines with your buddies. What I would say is that, post about it. No one expects anybody to be super athletes. And I'm not saying you got to go start a YouTube channel or anything like that, but bring it to people like us and we can popularize what you're doing. I have several people in my comment section that are like, I have this really obscure YouTube channel. It's got, only a couple subscribers, but I'm physically revisiting Aikido. Maybe I'm not doing it in an actual dojo, but I'm showing what I'm doing and I'm showing the progress. Subscribe to those people, support those people. It costs nothing. And it's still a way for you to contribute your passion to the art, even if you don't feel like you're physically or technically able to make contributions that way. You can still support things, you can still be a part of it, you can still investigate on your own. This is not a club that is exclusive, and it shouldn't be. I fear that one of the great mistakes of historical Aikido was splintering off into these many styles and causing brain drain, and a little bit of dissent and a little bit of creativity and critiquing of one another is healthy. That is what keeps standards high, and we don't want to see the brain drain. We want you here. This is exactly where we want you, even if we don't always agree on things. Now, how standards and things can manifest is kind of beyond the scope of this particular podcast. So I'm not going anywhere. We can do many more in the future, I'm sure, if assuming I haven't done a horrible job at this one and I am invited to return. However, I don't have much else to add there, though, although I could speak on those kinds of things for hours and hours about standards and how to approach this and that. But hopefully this is at least a primer for people about my thoughts, and it probably helps clarify some of the things, some of the content on my channel, and people can come here and help be helped to understand where I'm coming from, because it's different to process a piece of content and try and shove everything into a nice box, and these casual conversations help bring out details that might otherwise be lost in my editing process or in the platform, or and in many ways YouTube is not an education platform, so that there's that too. I have to make thumbnails and provocative statements that keep attention and whatnot, because at the end of the day I want people to see it, and if I'm willing to make certain I'm willing to do certain things so that people do see it, even if I wouldn't necessarily give up those things in a conversation like this. So I'll leave it at that, unless you have anything else. I could
No,
ramble on
this has
for
been
hours and
a
hours to come.
fantastic conversation. I enjoyed this even more than our first one, which I enjoyed immensely. So
Well,
I would
you
like
know
to
where to
very much
find
have
me.
you back on, and I know we can chat for quite a long time. And for those people listening, thank you for joining and sticking with it through all the way to the end. We will be back again with more episodes. We'll probably have Tengu on to dive into even more stuff. And if you have any suggestions of topics you would like us to cover, please put them in the comments section or let us know, and we're happy to cover what you want to hear. So Tengu, thank you very much for joining me this evening, or it's morning your time. Really appreciate having you.
Pleasure. If I might add one last thing before I forget, shameless plug. YouTube channel,
Yes,
Tengu Martial Arts. And also I do have an email that is open. It's just for the YouTube channel, Tengu Martial Arts at outlook.com. So if people want to get in touch with me for whatever reason, they've got ideas, or they want to tell me how stupid and wrong I am, that's the place to that's the place to levy those complaints, or reach out, because I do read my comments, but there's limitations on that as a communication platform. All right, that's
perfect.
now
Definitely
that
go
that
check
is all
out
I
his
have.
channel. So thank
Yes,
you very much, Tengu. Have a great rest of your day.
will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. If you're interested in ideas for evolving your Aikido, please take a look at the Spirit Aikido online program. There are more than 400 videos in the program containing material collected from a variety of different arts, which I believe fit very well within Aikido's framework. Stay tuned for more episodes, and in the meantime, enjoy your training.